October 12, 1918. The Meuse-Argonne Offensive, France. Captain Sam Woodfill watched the German machine gun position that was pinning his company in the open and made the assessment that his professional experience as a soldier, which went back to 1901, had taught him to make in exactly these circumstances. He was going to have to deal with it personally. Not because there was no one else available. His company had plenty of men. But the position was placed to cover the approach in a way that prevented any group advance, and the individual approach that the terrain permitted was an approach that required the specific kind of marksmanship and the specific kind of nerve that Sam Woodfill had been developing since he was a boy in the Kentucky hills who hunted squirrels and rabbits because the family needed the food. He moved toward the German position alone. What followed over the course of that October afternoon in the forests of France, 3 weeks before the armistice that would end the First World War, was one of the most extraordinary individual combat performances in the history of the American military. The first machine gun position that Woodfill located was concealed in a thicket. He crawled toward it, identified the crew, and killed the gunners with his Springfield rifle, 1 shot per man, at close range. He moved to the next position. There was a second machine gun, also concealed, also covering the approach that his company needed to advance through. Woodfill crawled to it, identified the crew, killed them. A third position. Crawled to it. Killed them. A fourth position. The same. When he reached the 5th German machine gun that afternoon and ran out of ammunition for his rifle, he killed the crew with his pistol. When the pistol ran out of ammunition, he picked up a captured German pickaxe from the floor of the trench and continued. By the time the afternoon was over, Sam Woodfill had personally destroyed 5 German machine gun positions, killed approximately 20 German soldiers, and cleared the path that his company had been unable to advance through. General John Pershing, who had commanded the American expeditionary forces throughout the First World War and who had seen more individual combat performance than most men alive in 1918, reviewed the citations and the witness accounts of what Woodfill had done on October 12 and said something that has been quoted ever since. He called Sam Woodfill the greatest soldier in the American Army. Sam Woodfill was born in Indiana in 1883, the son of a frontier soldier who had served in the Civil War and who had raised his children in the Ohio River Valley between Indiana and Kentucky in the specific combination of frontier self-reliance and genuine military tradition that the region's history produced. He had learned to shoot because shooting was a survival skill in the hills where he grew up, not in the way that the phrase survival skill is sometimes used loosely, but in the specific sense that the family ate what the children hunted, and that a child who could not hit what he shot at was a child who did not contribute to the family's food supply. He had enlisted in the Army in 1901 at the age of 18, for years after the Spanish-American War, with the specific intention of making the Army his career because the Army represented both the security that a career soldier's pay provided and the continuation of the military tradition that his father had established. He had served in the Philippines, in Alaska, in Panama, and in the various stateside assignments that Army careers between major wars produced, building a professional record that his superiors consistently noted as outstanding in the specific ways that a professional soldier's record is outstanding: marksmanship, physical fitness, reliability, the qualities that the peacetime Army could measure and the war the Army would eventually fight would test. He had arrived in France with the 60th Infantry Regiment, 5th Infantry Division, in the final months of the war, and his company had been moving through the Argonne in October 1918 as part of the Meuse-Argonne offensive that General Pershing had designed to break through the German defensive lines and win the war before the winter set in. The German defensive positions in the Argonne, which we described in the Meuse-Argonne video elsewhere on this channel, were among the most formidable that the Western Front had produced in 4 years of fortification, and the specific problem of German machine guns positioned to cover the approach routes through the forest was the problem that Woodfill solved on October 12, 1918 in the way that he solved all tactical problems, by going directly at it himself. The Medal of Honor that Woodfill received for his actions on October 12 was awarded with the endorsement of Pershing's personal account, which made it one of the most highly endorsed Medal of Honor awards in the history of the First World War. But what happened to Sam Woodfill after the war reflects something about American military culture and American celebrity culture that the specific heroism of his October afternoon stands in contrast to. He came home. He continued his Army career, but the Army of the 1920s was a contracting peacetime institution, and the promotions that should have rewarded his wartime performance were slow in coming in a period when the Army was reducing itself from the wartime force that had fought in France to the peacetime establishment that budget constraints and political indifference produced. He retired from the Army as a captain, the same rank he had held in France on October 12, 1918. The greatest soldier in the American Army, in the assessment of the man who had commanded that army, retired at a rank that reflected the peacetime Army's inability to reward wartime performance in the institutional ways that a better designed system would have. He went back to Indiana and worked as a laborer, as a farmer, as whatever the Depression and its aftermath made available to a man with his skills in the civilian economy of the 1930s, because the army pension that a captain's retirement provided was insufficient to live on, and the civilian economy did not have a specific use for the skills that making him the greatest soldier in the army had required. When the Second World War began and the army was expanding again, Woodfill requested recall to active duty. He was accepted. He served in a training capacity, teaching the specific skills he had developed over 40 years of army service to the generation of soldiers who would fight the next war. He retired again when the war ended, in 1944, at the age of 61, having served his country in 2 world wars and in the peacetime years between them with a consistency and a quality that Pershing's assessment of October 12, 1918 had not been wrong about. He died in 1951. He was 68 years old. He had spent his final years in modest circumstances in Indiana, a man whose specific heroism had produced specific recognition, the Medal of Honor and Pershing's endorsement, and whose subsequent life had proceeded with the modest circumstances that a retired captain's pension and a Depression-era civilian economy produced. The contrast between what Woodfill did on October 12, 1918, and what the country did for Sam Woodfill in the years that followed is not a comfortable contrast, and the military historians who have studied Woodfill's case have not been able to produce a comfortable explanation for it. He was not dramatic in the way that the era's celebrity soldiers were dramatic. He did not write a memoir. He did not go on speaking tours. He did not cultivate the journalists and the politicians who might have converted his military reputation into the civilian celebrity that could have produced a comfortable post-service life. He was a soldier. He had done what soldiers do. He had gone home and continued to be what he was, a man of modest background and extraordinary capability who had demonstrated that capability on a single afternoon in France and who did not subsequently demand that the demonstration be remembered on his behalf. The army remembered him at least enough to invite him to stand near the casket at the burial of the unknown soldier at Arlington National Cemetery in 1921, alongside Sergeant Alvin York, the other great individual hero of the Meuse-Argonne, as one of the recognized symbols of what American soldiers had done in the First World War. York became famous. Woodfill did not. York wrote a memoir and was played by Gary Cooper in a Hollywood film that made him one of the most recognized faces in America for a generation. Woodfill gave occasional interviews and was remembered in the histories that covered the Meuse-Argonne in specific detail and forgotten in the broader American memory that prefers the stories that have been told in films and books to the stories that have been told only in military records and specialized histories. The injustice of this, if injustice is the right word, is not a simple one. York's greater fame reflected genuine differences in personality and in the choices that each man made about how to relate to the public attention that followed them. York wanted to be known. Woodfill did not particularly want to be known. The America that gives fame to those who seek it is not necessarily wrong to do so. It is giving people what they are asking for. But the man who was greater, in the assessment of the most qualified observer available, was the one who did not seek it. Sam Woodfill on October 12, 1918, moved from machine gun position to machine gun position, rifle and pistol and pickaxe, clearing the path that his company could not advance through, because that was what the situation required and because he was the soldier who could do it. He had been doing what situations required since 1901. He would do it until 1944. He never stopped being the greatest soldier. He was just not famous for it. That is the Sam Woodfill story. The extraordinary thing done by the ordinary man, and the ordinary life that followed the extraordinary thing. Pershing was right. But Pershing's endorsement was not enough to make the America that needed to move on from the First World War remember the man whose performance had, in the general's assessment, been the highest expression of what American soldiers had been. He had been the greatest soldier. He went home and dug wells. That is the story. That is what America sometimes does with its greatest soldiers. It lets them go home and dig wells. Sam Woodfill deserved better. He knew it. He didn't complain. That was also who he was.